You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
Meet Mimecast. They're in the business of taking companies at risk of cyber attack and putting them at ease. Picture this. It's Monday morning. You're cruising through hundreds of unread emails. Your impulse to promptly click, download, or respond could be a prompt to launch a cyber attack. An email address is a direct digital path to the mind, the machine, and the data of every person in your organization. It needs better security. I know what you're thinking. I'm all set. I have Microsoft 365 protection, Dave. It might not be enough. That's where Mimecast comes in. They've developed a system that fortifies your email security and reduces costs, risks, and complexities, enabling you and your business to work protected. So before you click your next email, visit Mimecast.com to start your free 30-day trial. North Korean cyberespionage against a Russian aerospace firm. The Reptile Rootkit is used against South Korean systems. An update on Cloudzy. Quap is using torrents to move data stolen in MOVEit exploitation. Andrea Little Limbago from Interos wonders about the dangers of jumping headfirst into new technologies. Rick Howard ponders quantum computing. And Meduza is back on Apple Podcasts. I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire Intel briefing for Monday, August 7th, 2023. Solidarity against what Russian TV is calling the collective West is one thing, but Pyongyang isn't sentimental enough to let that stand in the way of industrial espionage. Reuters reports that North Korean operators have successfully penetrated NPO Mashinostroyenia, a rocket design bureau headquartered in a Moscow suburb. The apparent industrial espionage wasn't deterred by Russia's attempts to cultivate closer relations with Pyongyang, which it views as a potential supplier of ammunition and other material for the war against Ukraine. Sentinel Labs researchers are the source for the technical details in the Reuters report, and they found two instances of a North Korean compromise. One, the compromise of an email server, was by Scarcroft. The second involved a Windows backdoor, OpenCarrot, which has been associated with the Lazarus Group. The relationship between the two compromises remains unclear. They could be cooperating, or Pyongyang may consider the target important enough to hedge its bets by assigning the Russian firm two different intelligence groups to multiple independent threat actors, as Sentinel Labs puts it. Sentinel Labs, in the course of its usual monitoring of North Korean cyber activity, identified a leaked email collection containing an implant with characteristics related to previously reported DPRK-affiliated threat actor campaigns. This led to discovery of the larger campaign. It's evidence of Pyongyang's determination to advance its missile development program, a goal it probably considers more important than any new collaborative relationship with Moscow. Threat actors are using the open-source kernel module rootkit Reptile to target Linux systems in South Korea, the Hacker News reports. This isn't Reptile's first appearance in South Korean networks. Companies there have seen it before. The OnLab Security Emergency Response Center said in a report on the malware that the initial point of access in this most recent wave remains unclear. The researchers, however, were able to provide considerable information about the malware itself. Several malicious tools were used by the attacker. These tools included the Reptile rootkit, a reverse shell, a command tool, and a startup script. These tools allowed the attackers to gain access and control over the victim's computer. Additionally, the attackers used another malware strain called ISH, which is a special kind of shell that uses the ICMP protocol to communicate with the attacker. The reason for using ISH was likely to avoid detection by traditional network monitoring methods that look for suspicious TCP or HTTP communications. While the targeting of South Korean companies might suggest a North Korean operation, there's at present no attribution. The open-source Rootkit is in principle available to several distinct threat actors, and it's entirely possible that Pyongyang has nothing to do with Reptile. Halcyon has published an update on Cloudzy, an ISP that provides services to various APTs and ransomware affiliates. Halcyon's researchers were contacted by the IPXO address marketplace, which was leasing 14 IP ranges to Cloudzy. Halcyon says, the IPXO representative informed Halcyon that based on the research report, they're taking and will continue to take action to prevent additional abuse. They asked for additional intelligence from Halcyon, which was provided for their consideration. Halcyon's report said that Cloudzy, despite its self-presentation as a company incorporated in the U.S., is for the most part staffed by employees of a company based in Tehran. Cloudzy said in a statement to CSO that it's investigating the situation, so we'll all await the outcome of Cloudzy's self-examination. The Clop ransomware group is using torrents to leak data stolen via the MOVEit vulnerabilities, Bleeping Computer reports. Decentralized torrents offer a more efficient way for the group to distribute the data while making it more difficult for law enforcement to shut them down. Bleeping Computer explains, even if the original seeder is taken offline, a new device can be used to seed the stolen data as necessary. If this proves successful for Clop, we will likely see them continue to utilize this method to leak data as it's easier to set up, does not require a complex website, and may further pressure victims due to the increased potential for broader distribution of stolen data. Yuri Shishal, the head of Ukraine's State Special Communications Service, has outlined their organization's war objective, to push Russia back into an intellectual and IT Middle Ages. Achieving this goal involves a complex strategy, including effective defense measures and international support for sanctions to disrupt Russia's IT supply chain. In an interview with the Kyiv Independent, Shishal reviewed the cyber phase of Russia's war, describing the relentless nature of Russian cyber attacks. These cyber attacks began as preparations in January and February of the previous year, leading up to Russia's conventional invasion. Notably, wiper attacks were a significant component of this cyber preparation, with a major assault on state authorities marking the starting point. Despite the initial successes of the cyber attacks, Ukraine has managed to defend against subsequent attacks, attributed to the rapid application of lessons learned during the lead-up to the war. These lessons were gained through prior experiences of Russian cyber operations during the Crimea invasion in 2014 and the NotPetya campaign in 2017. Successful defense has also been enhanced through improved cooperation between the private sector, friendly foreign governments, and various Ukrainian government agencies. Infighting over agency interests has given way to a more collaborative atmosphere. Sanctions against Russia have proven effective and are encouraged to continue. Shishal believes that excluding Russia from international organizations and isolating the country from the rest of the world will hinder their access to crucial technologies, ensuring future security for Ukraine. Despite Russia's efforts to evade sanctions, their dependency on Western systems, especially from the U.S., will likely impede their ability to launch attacks within the next 6 months to a year, favoring Ukraine's position in the conflict. And finally, Meduza, an independent Russian-language news service operating from Riga, Latvia, said Friday that Apple removed Meduza's flagship podcast, What Happened, from the Apple Podcast streaming platform. What Happened focuses on news affecting Russia, and Meduza isn't particularly sympathetic with the Russian regime. Apple's suspension notice read, "We found an issue with your show, What Happened, which must be resolved before it's available on Apple Podcasts. Your show has been removed from Apple Podcasts." Meduza says that no further explanation was offered, but the outlet says that it was effectively outlawed by Russia this past January when it was designated an undesirable organization. According to Meduza, Roskomnadzor, Russia's Internet Governance Authority, complained to Apple about Meduza earlier this summer, and Meduza believes that Roskomnadzor's complaint may have prompted the suspension. Whatever the cause, the ban was short-lived. Meduza wrote in a Sunday update, 2 days after it was removed, What Happened is again available on the Apple Podcast streaming platform. Apple did not provide a reason for suddenly removing and restoring the podcast. It's an unusual incident. Apple, like other companies, tries to comply with local laws where it operates, but Cupertino isn't in the habit of saying how high when Roskomnadzor cries jump. If nothing else, the incident illustrates the challenges platforms face as they try to straddle the divide between publisher and common carrier. Perhaps Roskomnadzor should consider traveling to Riga itself. Peacefully, of course. Coming up after the break, Andrea Little Limbago from Interos wonders about the dangers of jumping headfirst into new technologies. Our own Rick Howard ponders quantum computing. Stay with us. Are you frustrated with cyber risk scores backed by mysterious data, zero context, and cloudy reasoning? Typical cyber ratings are ineffective, and the true risk story is begging to be told. It's time to cut the BS. Black Kite believes in seeing the full picture with more than a score, one where companies have complete clarity in their third-party cyber risk using reliable, quantitative data. Make better decisions. Reduce your uncertainty. Trust Black Kite. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, session hijacking, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, session cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific exposed data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation that fits seamlessly into existing incident response frameworks. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. And it is always my pleasure to welcome back to the show Rick Howard. He is the CyberWire's own Chief Security Officer, also our Chief Analyst. Rick, welcome back.
Hey, Dave.
So on this week's CSO Perspectives podcast, you are talking about quantum computing and the potential impact to enterprise security. And Rick, I have to say, I think I will join a lot of people out there who say that I do not understand a whole lot about what quantum computing really is or how it works under the hood. But what I do know...
It's a big club, Dave.
Yeah,
You're good.
I think it was like Richard Feynman, who like there's the quantum mechanics man, said that he didn't understand quantum dynamics. So I don't feel that bad about my limited understanding. But what I do know is that when it finally gets here, we're going to have computers that are much faster than the computers we have today. But I'm reminded of like what we say about fusion energy. Like it's always 20 or 30 years away, no matter when you ask. Are we in that mode with quantum computing?
That's what it feels like most of the time, because you're right about that, Dave. Quantum computing is in a class of near future technologies that when and if they ever get here are going to fundamentally change how we all live our lives, not just in the cybersecurity and tech worlds, but for, everybody on the planet. But for as long as I can remember, like you said, these technologies have always been just over the horizon, like, artificial general intelligence, AGI, 5G networking, autonomous vehicles, and abundant solar energy. And like you said, it doesn't matter how many years go by, it's always just 30 years away. But what I've noticed this past year or so, that a collection of quantum experts have started to cautiously reduce their estimates about when quantum will be ready for the masses. Some are saying it's like 5 to 10 years away. So it might be time for the general security practitioner to do a little planning.
So what is the risk here, Rick? I mean, I know it has something to do with breaking modern-day encryption algorithms, which sounds bad.
Yeah.
I mean, is this the end of times? Should we shut down the internet, go back to the Pony Express, smoke signals, all that kind of stuff? Just say that was a bad idea and we should never do that again?
Well, I would say that'd be plan B, Dave, all right? So,
okay.
An alternate plan A, if we're going to, label things, okay, might be to really think about what's at stake here. So thanks to quantum characteristics of, get this, superposition and entanglement, and I don't even pretend to understand what those two words mean, quantum computers are massive parallel processing machines. And as my friend Dr. Georgiana Shea says, not a new supercomputer, but a new super duper computer, right? So I really love that characterization, right? Because by the way these things are designed, they won't be able to easily break all encryption schemes, but they will be exceptionally good at breaking modern day asymmetric encryption schemes. These are all the things that are the engine behind everyday internet commerce and probably the linchpin to protecting many government secrets worldwide. And when we get there, the world is going to change. So in this episode, we're going to explain all of that in detail and talk about some of the ongoing efforts to buy down the risk before we get to that milestone.
All right. Well, I will look forward to checking that out for sure. The podcast is CSO Perspectives. You can learn all about how you can access that on our website, thecyberwire.com, also n2k.com. Rick Howard, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
And joining me once again is Andrea Little Limbago. She is Senior Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos. Andrea, it is always my pleasure to welcome you back to the show. I, over the years, have become convinced that we are a reactive species, that humans, by our nature, are not good at getting in front of things, that things have to get really bad before we're willing to change. And that's a long way around of saying that's something I want to check in with you on. When it comes to technology and security, are we always catching up, or do we even have the ability? Is it in our DNA to get ahead of things?
It's a great question. And I think in general, I would tend to agree with you on that. But I think we need to try not to be. And so
right. So we have aspirations.
We have to have aspirations not to be. And part of it, so much of it goes back to, whether it's the cycle and companies have to report on that quarterly, annual, with quarterly earnings versus, 2 years out. So it's short-term, long-term thinking, which I think always dampens our ability to think longer term. But, I'm slightly optimistic that we're starting to have some of these thoughts and considerations, at least in cybersecurity. These were discussions that weren't had at all during some of the previous big booms and or technological shifts for the industry. And so, but the one that I'm keeping an eye on right now a lot, because I'm not, the jury is out on this one on generative AI. It's going to have a big impact. We're already seeing that. It was an enormous leap. Some people say that machine learning advanced more in, say 6 months than in the previous decades. I mean, it really was a significant shift with ChatGPT and all the other large language model that were out there. But my concern is that we're seeing, because of that, it's almost like the gold rush. Everyone's jumping onto it and putting it into into their products, using it in different ways, both personally and professionally. And there's a whole lot of concern about what is the security of that data? How's data privacy? What's occurring with that? There are copyright infringement lawsuits going on right now over the training data. And there's a whole lot going on around that. And there are, though, it's not the most vocal voices in the room, but there are voices talking about the security of it and advising companies that if you're looking at implementing generative AI, which plenty of benefits, make sure security is part of it and not an afterthought. And I think that those companies that do, when they think about integrating generative AI, that do look at the security components of it, they'll be the ones that are less surprised going forward, because we're going to see everything from, we already have. We've seen data leaks because some engineers putting source code into it from a company. We've seen that. There are regulations around Europe talking about potentially halting the use of some of these. The U.S. has a whole AI working group to look into how to properly regulate going forward. So whether it's the regulatory risks or data leaks, data breaches, malicious uses of the generative AI, there's at least discussions going on now warning people to take security into account and not as an afterthought. And I don't think we had that as much, 10 years ago. So I think that at least the discussion is there. We'll see if people heed the advice or not, or they just want to jump in too quickly.
It's a really interesting point, and I agree with you. And I think lots of folks are saying that the release of these large language models was an inflection point, perhaps even for society. And I think there's something to that, as opposed to like social media, which I think was more diffuse. It's sort of, it oozed into our society.
That's right.
Rather than being rather than capturing everyone's imagination all at once. So there's a difference there. I'm curious, you and I often talk geopolitics, and I worry that I'm being a bit provincial in my thinking here. Are there nations who part of their culture is being more cautious about these sorts of things? I think we have here in the US, we have this, move fast and break things cliche, but are there cultures who take a more measured approach?
Well, I think for sure the European governments are most vocal in raising concerns about it and wanting to make sure data privacy is implemented into it. There's been much more action at that level. But I would say, I think you're back to your initial point on human nature. I think for the most part, we're seeing organizations trying to jump on this and to get that lead, because boards are asking the company, their executives, what is your plan to integrate this and to make sure that your competitors are not, and they don't get that head start on it. And so it's framed. And so as long as it's a competitive global economy, we're going to see a lot of jumping on it. But hopefully it's jumping and looking before leaping, as opposed to just jumping and then looking backwards after and think, we probably should have secured that. Or we probably should not put our IP into a question for a chatbot. But I do think, there remains a big European, U.S. gap. And then I'd say, on the other end, on the authoritarian side, it's, consume as much data as possible by the governments and have government control of it. So this very likely will just be another way to try to be used to gain control over information within their geographic domains and within their cyber domains.
What about the regulatory component here? Is it, when something happens this quickly, is the regulatory regime in a position to be able to be nimble?
Not yet. At least not the U.S. Not yet. No. But at least they're talking about it. And I think you make a good point as far as social media really did kind of take a bit of time to diffuse and really take over our lives. This happened really with a shock. Government is talking about this way more than they hopped on. Social media discussions took a very long time to really gain traction, but we're seeing some traction on this already. And part of it's due to some of the lawsuits, especially for due to the training data. We've seen defamation lawsuits because if you ask a question into it, it could give false information about a person. We've seen that in Australia. There's a lawsuit from a mayor who, I think the question basically it said that he was someone that was a whistleblower put in jail, was the one actually as a whistleblower and putting someone else in jail. So there's been a bunch of different defamation lawsuits as well that are going into it. And then one thing what we haven't even talked about was just some of the wrong information that gets produced through it, and being concerned about that. It's a huge potential vector for disinformation, or just for continuing to exacerbate or amplify wrong information because that's what's been fed into it by the training models. And we see that with the halluc citations, the fake citations that are basically are made up. They sound credible. They look like they're credible, but they're entirely made up.
Right, that's the thing. It'll give you wrong information with absolute confidence.
Yeah, and that's and sort of like the notion of are we learning and being more proactive? And that's just one area, right? So we've got 5G looking ahead to 6G. We've got secure by design. This is pushing forward, and I think that would not have happened 10, 15 years ago. So thinking about security by design as we're building out these new technologies, those are the kind of things I see that give me optimism that at least some people are thinking about it now, but I'm not entirely sure that a few decades ago security was on anyone's radar for that, because there was a lot more optimism about the positive aspects of these technologies as opposed to them being used or weaponized.
Right. All right. Well, Andrea Little Limbago, thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
Tired of cybersecurity mega conferences? MWise is different. With a focused agenda and targeted problem solving, MWise is where security's best go to get better. From September 18th through the 20th in Washington, D.C., you'll join a special community of security's sharpest minds, hear perspectives you might not get anywhere else, and reach a new level of mastery that'll prepare you for what's next. Register early and save at mwise.mandiant.com/conf23. That's mwise.mandiant.com/CONF23. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Don't forget to check out the Grumpy Old Geeks podcast. I join Jason and Brian on their show for a lively discussion of the latest security news every week. You can find Grumpy Old Geeks where all the fine podcasts are listed. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at cyberwire@n2k.com. Your feedback helps us ensure we're delivering the information and insights that help keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. We're privileged that N2K and podcasts like the CyberWire are part of the daily intelligence routine of many of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, as well as the critical security teams supporting the Fortune 500 and many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Trey Hester, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. There's nothing worse than relying on a legacy SIM that your security team has outgrown, especially when it impacts your ability to detect real incidents. Hunter's SOC platform offers built-in, always up-to-date detection rules and automatic correlation that allows SOC analysts to focus on higher-value tasks that impact your organization. It's time to move to a platform that reduces risk, complexity, and cost for the SOC. It's time to replace your SIM. Learn more by visiting hunters.security today. One final note, if you missed our recent panel discussion with my friends at AWS, Splunk, and Dragos on securing digital transition, you can catch the conversation on demand by visiting thecyberwire.com/Dragos.